Canada is the second largest country on Earth, nearly 10 million square kilometers. It stretches across 6 time zones, and 90% of Canadians live within 160 kilometers of the U.S. border. Draw a line across southern Canada, and almost everyone is below it. The rest millions of square kilometers of forests, tundra, and lakes is practically empty. So why is the world's second biggest country squeezed into a thin strip along its southern edge? Let's establish the scale. Canada is 9.98 million square kilometers, larger than the entire United States, including Alaska. It has more lakes than the rest of the world combined. It has coastline on 3 oceans, and it has 38 million people. California alone has more people than all of Canada. Here's the shocking part. If you draw a line 160 kilometers north of the U.S. border, 90% of Canada's population lives below it. Major cities, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, all hug the border. The vast majority of Canada, virtually uninhabited. So why is one of the world's largest countries one of its emptiest? First, the obvious answer, Canada is cold. But not just wear a jacket cold. We're talking about climate that makes human settlement extremely difficult. Look at this climate map. Most of Canada experiences subarctic or Arctic conditions. The Northern Territories, Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut see winter temperatures of -30 to -40 degrees Celsius regularly. Some areas drop to -50 degrees Celsius. But here's what matters more than cold: the growing season. Southern Canada, where everyone lives, gets 120 to 180 frost-free days per year. That's enough to grow crops and sustain agriculture. Move 500 kilometers north, and you're down to 60 to 90 frost-free days. That's borderline for farming. Go further north, and agriculture becomes impossible. Now overlay the population line on the climate map. Notice something? Canadians live almost exactly where the climate allows agriculture and year-round habitation. It's not a coincidence. It's geography determining where civilization can exist. Now, let's talk about something most people don't know: the Canadian Shield. This is a massive geological formation covering nearly half of Canada's land area, about 5 million square kilometers. The Shield is ancient bedrock, some of the oldest rock on Earth. It's mostly granite and gneiss, covered with thin, acidic soil. Here's the problem: you can't farm it. The soil is too poor. The rock is too close to the surface. It's covered in lakes, bogs, and boreal forest. The Canadian Shield wraps around Hudson Bay and extends from the Arctic down through Ontario and Quebec. It's beautiful wilderness. It's also completely unsuitable for agriculture or large-scale settlement. Compare this to the United States. The U.S. has the Great Plains, massive stretches of deep, fertile soil perfect for farming. Canada has the Shield, rocky, infertile, and impossible to develop for agriculture. Geography gave the U.S. farmland. Geography gave Canada rocks and trees. So where are Canada's 38 million people? Almost all concentrated in a few specific zones. Southern Ontario and Quebec, about 20 million people, more than half of Canada. This region has the best combination of climate, fertile land, and access to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River. British Columbia's lower mainland, about 3 million around Vancouver. Mild coastal climate, natural harbor, but boxed in by mountains. Alberta's Calgary-Edmonton corridor, about 3 million. Sits on fertile prairies with oil wealth. The prairies, about 3 million total. Farmland, but harsh continental climate. Atlantic provinces, about 2.5 million. Maritime economy, but limited land and harsher winters. The territories, about 120,000 people combined in an area covering 3.9 million square kilometers. That's an area larger than India, with fewer people than a small town. Here's why northern Canada stays empty. There's almost no infrastructure. Canada has one transcontinental highway, the Trans-Canada Highway. It runs along the southern border. There are a few highways extending north, but they dead end in the wilderness. Most of Canada's north has no roads at all. Towns like Iqaluit have no road connection to the rest of Canada. Everything arrives by plane or ship. A loaf of bread can cost $10. Fresh produce is insanely expensive. Building materials cost triple what they do in the South. Compare this to Russia, another massive cold country. Russia built the Trans-Siberian Railway and highways connecting cities across Siberia. It's expensive and difficult, but Russia made the investment. Canada never did because the economics don't work. Why? Because northern Canada has no economic base to justify the infrastructure cost. Siberia has oil, gas, and minerals that pay for cities and railways. Northern Canada has some mining, but not enough to support large populations. Building a highway through the Canadian Shield costs $10 to $20 million per kilometer. Building through permafrost costs even more. To connect the territories by road would cost tens of billions for a population of 120,000. It doesn't make economic sense. Northern Canada's economy is limited to mining oil and gas extraction, government/military jobs, indigenous subsistence, hunting and fishing. That's it. No manufacturing, no agriculture, no tech industry, no major services sector. If you don't work in extraction industries or government, there are almost no jobs, and extraction jobs are often fly-in, fly-out. Workers fly to remote sites, work for weeks, then fly home to southern Canada. They don't settle permanently. They don't build communities. They make money and leave. Canada's population pattern was set centuries ago. When Europeans colonized Canada, they settled where they could farm and where rivers provided transportation, the St. Lawrence Valley, the Great Lakes, the Pacific Coast. The fur trade pushed into the north, but it never created permanent settlements of significant size. The Hudson's Bay Company built trading posts, not cities. When the fur trade declined, most posts were abandoned. The Canadian Pacific Railway, completed in 1885, ran along the southern route because that's where customers lived and where agriculture could support towns. It reinforced the southern concentration. By the time Canada became industrialized, the pattern was locked in. Cities in the south had infrastructure, universities, hospitals, and economies. The north had nothing. And once that gap exists, it compounds. Young people leave the north for education and jobs in the south. They don't come back. Could northern Canada ever be settled? Climate change is actually making some areas more habitable, longer growing seasons, less extreme cold. But it's not enough to change the fundamental equation. Agriculture. Even with warming, most of the Canadian Shield will never support farming. The soil is the problem, not just the climate. Permafrost. About 50% of Canada sits on permafrost. As it thaws due to climate change, it creates infrastructure disasters. Buildings sink, roads buckle. This makes development harder, not easier. Water access. The north has water, but it's locked in ice much of the year. Ports are only useful if they're ice-free year-round, or you invest billions in icebreakers. Distance. Even if you built cities in the north, they'd be 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers from major markets. Shipping costs would be astronomical. Compare Canada's north to similar regions. Alaska has massive oil wealth and military spending that supports its 730,000 people. Northern Scandinavia has the Gulf Stream moderating climate, proximity to European markets, and centuries of infrastructure investment. Northern Canada has none of these advantages. It's colder, more remote, and has less economic incentive for development. So, what's Canada's future? The population will keep growing. Projections suggest 50 million by 2050. But almost all of that growth will happen in the same southern cities that are already crowded. Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal will become more expensive and more congested. Housing costs will keep rising. But moving north isn't a realistic solution for most people. Some northern mining towns might grow when resource prices are high, but they'll shrink when prices fall. The boom-bust cycle continues. Climate change might make some marginal land more usable, but it's more likely to create problems thawing permafrost, infrastructure damage, wildfire risk than opportunities. The fundamental reality won't change. Canada is geographically constrained. The climate, the Canadian Shield, the distance, and the lack of agricultural land in the north mean 90% of Canada will likely remain empty for generations. So here's why 90% of Canada is empty. Because geography made southern Canada barely habitable. and northern Canada nearly impossible to settle. The US got the Great Plains and warm southern states. Canada got the Canadian Shield and the Arctic. The US can spread its population across a continent. Canada has to squeeze 38 million people into a narrow strip where the climate allows crops and the Shield doesn't dominate. It's the second largest country on Earth, but most of it is beautiful, resource-rich wilderness that will probably never have cities. And that might actually be okay, because some places are more valuable empty than developed. But here's the question I want you to answer. If climate change makes northern Canada warmer and more accessible over the next 50 years, should Canada aggressively develop the north with new cities and infrastructure, or leave it as wilderness? Economic opportunity versus environmental preservation. What would you choose? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me if you'd actually move to a new northern Canadian city if one existed.